G'day guys, I'm Ryan, your Chief Espresso Officer, and today I'm going to do a deep dive on why your coffee may be sour. So we're going to look at a lot of different factors that make it up, whether you're drinking it with milk or without. But let's get started on why your coffee may be sour. Now, before we get started, I want to go into what the term actually refers to. When we talk about sourness in coffee, we're talking about that flavor that really sucks in your cheeks. It's not acidity, which is sometimes misrepresented as sour, because coffee has an acidity, which is like a sparkling water brightness to it, sometimes like a red grape sort of acidity. But that's not what we refer to as sour, although some people might recognize that as sour and think that's not right. And also, when you're drinking a milk coffee, some of the fruity, natural processed coffees, which are quite intense and sort of like that rich fruit flavor, can sometimes come across as though something's quite a bit sour in your milk, and it might taste some people like the milk's gone off. But that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is an actual problem that you have in your coffee where it's so sour tasting that it just doesn't seem right. And let's look at all the different factors, starting with the most important, the roast. So roasting is actually one of the most important steps in the process from the farm to your cup. And other than the bean itself and the quality of the bean, you can majorly affect the flavor of your coffee just by roasting it poorly. So even some of the greatest coffee beans in the world, if they're roasted by a poor roaster or in a roaster that has some mold or stuff like that, that really is going to affect your flavor at the end. Now, a light roasted coffee often brings forward a lot more of those brighter flavors from the coffee itself, and that can be mischaracterized as sour. But it isn't sourness, it's what you refer to as acidity, and that's a desirable characteristic in coffee itself. Now, if you see the label medium roast, or sometimes referred to as a city roast, that's what you want for espresso. So that's a medium roast, and there's obviously a million different graduation steps in between light, medium, dark. And what we're talking about is a general reference term being medium. And this is perfect for espresso because the oils are all perfectly soluble and come through in your cup, reducing that sourness as it might be. So medium roasts don't exclude the use of other brewing methods, but just don't use a light roasted coffee in your espresso machine. Now, if you are using a medium roast or a city roast coffee bean for your pour over or Chemex brewer, then make sure you're aiming for that citrusy, high intensity floral notes. Those are going to be much more enjoyable through a Chemex than if you get your dark chocolate, cacao flavors. So if you really want to cut out any sourness and maybe even that bright acidity, if you're not really enjoying that, make sure you stick to a medium roast for every type of coffee. They are very versatile. They can be used as a filter, they can be used in espresso, they can be used in a plunger. It doesn't matter whether you're drinking it with milk or without. If you look for a medium roast coffee in the description, then that's going to suit you perfectly. And if you want to go one step further, look for flavors of dark chocolates, milk chocolates, and stay away from the lemons, limes, citrus, those sort of acidic types of coffee. So now you're saying to me, well, my information on my coffee bag or on the website doesn't tell me if it's a light, medium or dark roast, so I don't really understand. Well, this is where you need to find a different roaster. So when your coffee's first roasted, there's a lot of carbon dioxide trapped inside that bean, and that's slowly released over time in a process that we refer to as degassing. So that CO2 will oxidize and then drift off into the air. But if you try to make a coffee, and especially an espresso coffee, because we're punching through all of that pressure onto the bean and soaking it in that hot water, when you are trying to make an espresso with a coffee that is less than a week old, the CO2 wraps itself around each piece of grind and stops the water from getting in, which means you end up with a sour coffee as a result. In order to eliminate that sourness, you might want to leave your coffee from the roast state sitting for about 1 to 2 weeks or 7 to 10 days in a relatively airtight space. So it doesn't have to be in a completely airtight chamber, but you don't want to leave it open and exposed to the atmosphere. So how do you know if your coffee is still too fresh? Because sometimes it takes a little bit longer than that 1 to 2 weeks. For instance, if it's in winter time where the humidity is lower and the pressure is lower, it's going to degas at a slower rate. So sometimes I've found that in winter time your coffee is too fresh for up to 4 weeks, depending on how you store it. So how do you tell? Well, the first thing to look for is how it pours. If it starts to pour nicely and then suddenly billows out and almost pours over the sides of the portafilter, then you know you're looking at a lot of carbon dioxide, and that is going to cause sourness in your cup. So as soon as you see that happening, you know this coffee is still too fresh and you're going to need to work around it or get some other beans in that are a little bit more degassed or developed, and they will taste a lot better in your final cup. And another thing to know is that when it's filling up the shot glass, if you have some glass shot glasses so you can see it, you're going to see about 2/3 of it being this bubbles and crema, and it looks great, but unfortunately it doesn't taste great. So you want to see a little bit of crema on the top, but you don't want to see half the shot glass filled with crema. Now, if you're brewing coffee that isn't espresso, and it's allowing for what we call a bloom, they love carbon dioxide. So your V60s, your pour overs, AeroPress, plunger, French press, all of those types where you add a little bit of water first and then it bubbles up, that's called a bloom. And that's actually the releasing of carbon dioxide. And they love fresh coffee. So you don't need to wait very long to use them. In fact, you'll want to try and use them in under 2 to 3 weeks. A coffee bean can have acidity, but that's a desirable flavor. A thing like a good Guji or Yirgacheffe from Ethiopia, they'll have acidity which is really bright and lemon and citrus and notes of floral and jasmine, and they're all great things to have in the cup. So it's not a bad thing to have acidity. An actual coffee is no more acidic than, say, a green apple. Now, the best way to describe sour versus acidic is sourness is sour warheads, or those sour worms that you get. Acidity is more like sparkling water, an orange, even like a strawberry has that acidity, which is nice, sweet, but bright, tingly sensation on your tongue. We're not talking about sucking in your cheeks. That's sour. So you're asking, well, I don't understand how you get an under-extracted coffee. Well, usually the time or the amount of coffee that comes out and how long that coffee is exposed to the water. So in espresso, we're looking at a volume or a ratio of 2 to 1. That means 2 lots of water to every 1 lot of coffee. So in an espresso coffee, that's 22.5 grams, and that changes depending on the basket. The recipe we use is 22.5 grams. We want to run that for about 30 seconds, give or take a couple of seconds, and get out 45 mils or around that mark. That is an even extracted coffee. If your coffee's gushing out, you can see that it's coming out and you might cut it short at 20 mils. That's still going to be under extracted if it's only taking 10 to 15 seconds to do. What you're looking for is that slow, even pour, and the coffee takes around about that 30 seconds to get you 2 times the amount out. So what we're looking at here is an under-extracted shot. See how it's gushing out? It's coming out the sides and it's yellowy. Well, that's because the water's rushing through the grinds and it's not actually allowing any of those yummy sugars to dissolve. It's just picking up more of those sour and astringent flavors. You'll need to fine up the grind if you see this happening, or add more in your basket. And this is where understanding your extraction and understanding how to dial in a grinder is super important. It's kind of like the sand versus rock experiment, where water passes more slowly through sand than obviously through large pebbles. So make sure that your extraction is nice and slow and even, and it doesn't go wavy and watery and yellow. But don't go too far making your grind nice and fine, because what will happen then, if it starts to drip through, is it's going to start to cook, burn, and it will taste quite bitter. However, that's another series on why is my coffee bitter. We're talking about why is my coffee sour. Okay, I want to bust open a couple of myths. The first one is that a ristretto is under-extracted coffee. It is not. Now, if you don't know what a ristretto is, it means restricted coffee. And it's a very particular style of coffee where you just take the normal extraction, but instead of running the full end-to-end from 0 to 30 seconds, you're stopping it after 20 seconds. This does not mean you're running your shot to 20 seconds. It does not mean that you're gushing it through and then stopping it at 20 seconds. It means that you're taking a nice, even extraction that would normally run to 30 seconds. And the best way of showing this is we run the shot and we move the cup out of the way after 20 seconds. That is a ristretto. It's different from this shot, which is running and can't even go past 20 seconds because it's just turned to basically water. A ristretto is this nice, intense, sweet coffee without the complexities of those last 8 to 10 seconds of extraction. Some people really enjoy this as a double ristretto because you get almost the same amount of volume, but you get a much deeper, richer experience. So busting that myth open, don't let anyone tell you that a ristretto is under-extracted. And the other myth that I want to bust open is that acidity is bad. As I explained before, the acidity is a desirable taste. It's like when you eat a strawberry or a grape. It's a tingling sensation. It's not how much acid you get in your stomach. Sour coffee is under-extracted coffee. And that does taste awful and it leaves a horrible aftertaste in your mouth. But acidity, a nice or even a bright acidity, will taste that same sensation like a lemon soft drink or sparkling water, or have that nice aftertaste, the same feeling that you'd get when you might eat an orange, say. So if you want to learn more about how to get the great tasting coffee at home or at your work, then check out my ultimatebaristacourse.com website, where I have a whole range of different videos in there to teach you how to become the ultimate barista yourself. I'm Ryan, your Chief Espresso Officer. Enjoy your brew.